things off. Well, yes, so I would like to welcome everyone to Tin Mountain's Nature Program Series. We knew tonight would be a very popular program, and actually this is, I think it's just about a year ago that we had this on our schedule. It was going to be a live program in Jackson, and it was one of the first programs that we had to cancel given everything that was going on. So I'm so glad that we are able to, to offer the program again, albeit in a virtual format. But hey, we will take it. Before I hand things over to our speaker, I want to first thank our Nature Program Series sponsors. And those are Hancock Lumber and Ragged Mountain Equipment. Additionally, I want to thank the Friends of the Whitney Community Center in Jackson. They are our special program sponsors for this evening, and want to thank them for their support. A few programs that we have coming up in the next few weeks. It's spring, so as you can imagine, our programs have a very avian tilt to them. Coming up next Thursday, we have another virtual program with Katie Lewis, our research manager, and that is Springbirds and Waterfowl. And that is a nice refresher for our annual Ducks and Donuts field program. We are going through with that in a modified format. We do have a few spots remaining. It is advanced registration required. So that is on Saturday, the 24th. If that's something that you're interested in, do please go to our website and you can register online. And then the following Thursday, April 29th, we have our perennial, what is now becoming another perennial program, Identifying Spring Warblers, with our board member, Will Broussard. And that is, just when you think you know them all, you watch that program and realize that there's still so much to figure out. So lots of great programs coming up. That's just in the next 2 weeks. In addition to our program sponsors that I've thanked, I want to also take a moment to thank all of you watching who are Tin Mountain Conservation Center members. It's because of contributions from our members that we are able to put on our Nature Program Series and other programs that we have. If you're not currently a member, I would encourage you to do so. You can do that right at our website, tinmountain.org. In the upper right-hand corner, there's a Support Us tab. And if becoming a member is not the right choice for you right now, in that same location, there's also an option to support our Nature Program Series. You can donate directly to our Nature Program Series and help us bring in great programs like we have this evening. As I said, this is a reboot of a program we had scheduled in person last April. We have had Andrew Timmons present a number of times. We are always excited to have him here, and it is always a popular program. And so I am, before I hand things over to him, I should say, for those of you who have not joined us for a Zoom program or haven't joined us in a while, everyone, I believe, was muted upon entry, and that's the preference. We don't want to be picking up any background sound that's going to be projected to everyone else watching this evening. If you have a question, the best way to ask that is to type it right into the chat feature at the bottom of the screen. I'll be monitoring the chat. And if there is an immediate clarifying question, I can jump in and ask that of Andy. Otherwise, I will plan to read through those questions to Andy at the end of the program. If you, and at that time, after I've read through those, if folks still have questions, you can unmute yourself and ask them directly, but I will start with the ones that come through the chat. With that said, I'm going to hand things over to Andy Timmons. He is the Black Bear Project leader for New Hampshire Fish and Game, and as I said, becoming a perennial presenter at Tin Mountain, which is something that we are very pleased about. So, Andy, I'm going to hand things over to you.
Okay, thank you, Nora. Evening, everyone. I'm very impressed with the amount of people tuning in. That's great. We always try to time these bear talks, particularly with Tin Mountain, for this time of year because it's very timely in the year of the black bear and when they start to get active, and certainly with the recent warm weather we had. We're certainly seeing bears starting to get active a little earlier this year than normal. So very timely topic, and I'm gonna share my screen and hope that this works as it should. Can folks see that okay?
Yep, Andy, that is coming through great. We are in full presentation mode.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to talk, and there's probably some that have seen this presentation, and I apologize if I retread material, but some of this messaging about bears really needs to be retread at times because it's important that the public understands, what bears on our landscape mean and how to coexist with bears. So I'm going to kind of cover an overview of black bear management in New Hampshire. I'll talk a little bit about population management, but I'm really going to spend most of my time on conflict management because as a bear manager, that's what it's about now. We've recovered populations, and this applies to bear managers throughout the range of black bears. We've moved beyond the period of being ultra conservative with bear populations, growing bear populations back from low levels. We've done all that. Now we have strong bear populations. We have an expanding human population, and black bear management's really about finding some peace and harmony between the two. So just recap population management. Every 10 years in New Hampshire, we update our big game management plan, and that guides the management of multiple big game species, bear being one of those. And it's at that time that we develop these desired population sizes for species such as bear. And this is done through some various means, but the real important component of this is that it solicits public input and determines what the public wants to see for bear populations, because all these species belong to the public. They belong to you folks, and they belong to the rest of the New Hampshire public. Our job is to manage these populations at levels that the population desires, and that is the case with all of these wildlife species. Bears are a little different than some of the other critters in that social factors usually play a more significant role in their upper limits of their population, more so than biological factors. Species such as deer, for example, tend to be limited biologically. They're limited by the amount of available habitat, which results in a healthy deer population. Bear are a little different. Usually before you hit those biological upper limits, there's usually a social limit that is reached. So an important understanding that bear populations would be higher in the state if it was based on biological factors, but socially, they set some upper limits. So I'll just first recap where we are statewide, and the jagged lines with the blue dot shows the estimated bear population over time, and the red line shows what the public set goal has done over time. And you can look at it one or two ways, kind of what came first, the chicken or the egg. You can look at the population and then wonder if the goal was set because of what the population was doing. And I certainly think that's been the case over time. Or you could look at the opposite in that these actual goals really played a large role in population size in the past. I will tell you that during the 90s and early 2000s, as our bear populations grew in the state, um, people tend to be fairly pleased. And each time we went back to our 10-year management plan, people often gravitated towards status quo, and this is a good example right here. We had, when we revisited this plan in 2005, we had approximately 5,000 bears in the state, so the goal was set for 5,000, or actually 5,200. And that certainly is the way that it went. I would say for the first time, when we redid the plan back in 2016, it's the first time that we actually saw these desired objective for bears actually get lowered in some parts of the state. So for the first time, the public said, we've kind of reached our maximum limit in some of these areas, and the real driver was the area that's somewhat familiar to you folks. The the lakes regions over to the Maine border. That was the area of the state where there was the greatest concern about expanding bear populations. And that's because it's the area of the state that's slated for the next wave of human development. So those are some of the factors that went into that. But where we are now, we're above goal. We're not dramatically above goal, and we're working towards the goal. And just I don't want to spend a lot of time on graphics because they can cause people to glaze over, including myself. But just to kind of give you a quick snapshot of where we are. In the northern region, in the White Mountains region, we're actually basically at goal. There's times we're above it, times we're below it, but by and large, we're at the goal. And this is particularly interesting because in the White Mountains, we've been consistently above goal, but we have been pushing that population down towards the goal, and we're there. But where we still need to do some work is the central region and some of the more southern management regions, specifically down here in the southwest too. So take home message, in about half of our regions, and there are 6 bear management regions, in about half of those, our objective is to continue pushing the population down a little bit towards the agreed upon goal. In the remaining half of the state, these other 3 regions, we're for the most part at goal. So we're not talking dramatic differences in where we need to be versus where we are, but we still have some work to do. And the way we control bear population growth is through an annual bear hunt. And we have around anywhere from between 10,000 and 11,000 people who purchase a bear hunting license each year. We saw a recent spike in that of about 15% during this COVID period, and that was kind of the case with a lot of our hunting license sales. But this has been successful, and we have been able to, for the most part, control bear population in these different regions by manipulating the bear hunting season and manipulating the harvest level. And our bear harvest has grown over time. In recent years, it seems like every other year or so, we're setting a new record harvest, and that certainly happened again in 2020. But there's a few things going on here and a few things driving this. One, we've had a growing bear population. We have strong bear numbers throughout the state. We have bear hunting throughout the state. And as bear numbers increase, so has an interest in hunting bear. As people see more bear, they become more interested in harvesting a bear. So all these factors have led into this increase in our overall bear harvest. And we do allow 3 methods of bear hunting in New Hampshire. They include bait hunting, still hunting, and hound hunting. Some of those are controversial methods, but right now they are tools in the toolbox. And we tend to see the greatest amount of the annual harvest come from bait hunting, and around 50 to 60% of the annual harvest is taken with bait. And admittedly, it's because bait hunters have the higher success rate. So I think we see people gravitate towards those methods that tend to be more successful. By comparison, a still hunter, a person who is out pursuing bears similar to the way you would hunt a deer, they have a success rate of about 3%. So some real dramatic differences in success. Bears are not easy to hunt, particularly in our heavily wooded forests of New Hampshire. But I want to move on to talk about managing bears on the landscape, particularly in the face of an expanding human population. And I talked about the fact that, bear population size is limited by social limits, people's opinions, people's tolerance, people's preferences. Those are all really the what provide the limiting factors on bear population. So moving forward, if we're going to continue to have strong bear populations in the state, it's going to be critical that we maintain high public tolerance for bears, because ultimately that's going to be the deciding factor. The problem is, how do we influence public perception and tolerance of species like bears? A lot of it's based on your value system. Many people think about these different critters in the same way that their parents and their grandparents thought about these critters. For example, most people are pretty fond of our ungulate species like deer and moose, but we tend to have people who are less enthusiastic about species that have claws and paws, such as bears and some of our canine species. And there's a lot of reasons for that. If it's a farmer that raises sheep or other types of livestock, they may view coyotes and bears as predators, and therefore feel threatened by potential loss. It could be a host of things, but the reality of it is, we play a big role, or I like to think we have the ability to influence people's perception of wildlife. We really need to be doing our part in order to promote the value of all these species on our landscape. People have a love-hate relationship with bears. Some people think very highly of bears, and that's great. Sometimes this can result in bear feeding, which isn't so great. But certainly, we see people that really hold bears in high regard. But there's other people that don't. I don't know. If we were live, I would ask folks to, give me some ideas of what they thought that dot was that shows up in this X-ray. But we're gonna have to skip all that, being the virtual format. But that dot at the end of that arrow is actually a BB, and this is the X-ray of a orphan cub that was brought into the Kill 'em Bear Center. This bear ultimately died. Wasn't from that BB, but it didn't help in any. So here you have an orphan cub on the landscape. This animal was extremely malnourished, undersized. I forget what it weighed, but it was probably in the 20-pound range, and it had a BB embedded in near its lungs. So it's just a reminder that these animals face some real hardships on the landscape. This is a bear that had that I brought down that had a rubber slug removed from its hindquarters. Again, people, sometimes people make poor decisions on how to respond to these animals, and I think we need to be doing a better job and better educating people about what a bear in the backyard really means and what more appropriate methods are of deterring that bear if it's deemed that that's what needs to happen. So I mentioned, as a bear manager, a big part of what I do and a big part of what a bear manager in any jurisdiction does nowadays is manage conflicts with bears and people. It's what in many ways I think it's the direction that a lot of wildlife management is taking, be it with species such as deer or turkey. As we have built these populations up, but more importantly, as we have failed to control our expanding human population, it puts these animals and these critters in closer proximity. It increases the likelihood of conflict. So it's really become a big part of managing wildlife on our landscape. I'll give you a second to read that. But those words really do strike home. When it comes to managing bear populations, it really is a lot easier to prevent it in the first place than it is to try to resolve it once it begins, because bears are persistent. Bears don't give up easy, particularly when there's high quality food involved. So if we really want to avoid conflicts with bears, and we need to be proactive, we need to be doing our part to try to prevent them from happening in the first place. So I'm going to talk about conflict trends in New Hampshire. So this is what bear-human conflicts have done over time, from the kind of the early 90s through present day. And in all these slides, you'll notice that I don't yet have 2020 bear conflict data. I do apologize for that. It should be available fairly soon, but I'm still waiting on that. But nonetheless, it provides a good snapshot. So during the 90s, as our bear populations were growing in the state, people were figuring out what bears on the landscape meant. We had an increasing trend in bear-human conflicts. That seems relatively straightforward. But since around the early 2000s through present day, although that number of complaints from one year to the next is highly variable, there is a hint of stability there, a real strong hint of stability. If you were to try to smooth these highs and lows out, you could almost vision a relatively flat line that would average, around 500 annual bear-human conflicts a year. We get these occasional years like 2012 where we get these real spikes, and that's a result of some real environmental conditions in that year that cause some issues like a drought, which I hope we're not headed for again. But another important way to interpret this is, if you look at the number of average number of complaints today, they're very similar to the number of complaints that we had back in the 90s. But some real differences are, we have double the number of bears on the landscape today that we had back then. And our human population now is around 1.3 million, whereas back in the early 90s was right around 1 million. So, the fact we have more people, more bears, but we don't have more complaints, that alone is a success story. So we are making headway. People are able to be educated, and people are being more proactive in doing their part to avoid conflicts. But there's always more to do. Bears have the ability to, I guess, test the limits. They're very smart, they're very resourceful, they're very food motivated, and they think pretty highly of people that allow them access to food. So this particular bear, she's not aggressive. She's not really a threat to people. The problem is if this window was open 2 or 3 inches, she would have gone in this house, because she did it over 60 times in the course of 2 summers at this facility. So, here's a bear that became highly conditioned to acquiring human-related food because the people that lived here allowed that to happen. It wasn't necessarily intentional feeding, although some of that probably played into it. But people did this to this bear. The problem is, for most people, a bear climbing in through the window is not going to be tolerated, and that's when hard decisions have to be made. There's times when the public takes it in their own hands and shoots bears due to home entry. And there's times when people put this difficult decision on managers, and it's an unfortunate way to have to manage these situations. But the reality of it is some of these bears, this is the only option. So we want to avoid that. So what are the leading causes of bear-human conflicts? And it doesn't matter if you're in New Hampshire, Vermont, Colorado. It's all the same story. One, you're dealing with very food-motivated animals. These animals, everything they do in the course of a day really relates to filling their belly with high quality food. So they're very food motivated, and they will take extreme risk in order to take advantage of high quality food. If we lived in a perfect world, and we don't, at all different times of the year, there'd be abundant natural foods available. Spring would come early, there'd be succulent green vegetation available to bears, and that would transition into, robust berry crops each summer, which would then lead into strong hard mass crops. But that's not reality. Mother Nature isn't always so kind, and things aren't always so predictable. In the meantime, when foods are lacking, there's always a large amount of human-related food on the landscape. And as a result, we know that there's a supplemental food source for species like bears when some of these natural foods are limited. And we know what the we know what the value of food is for bears. We know that bears are highly dependent on annual food abundance. This is a complicated graph, but only because there's multiple axes, but I'll just kind of quickly summarize it. And the black line is the annual rating of beach mass production or abundance, and the red line is the the red line is the beach abundance. The black line is the percentage of adult female bears that gave birth to cubs in a given year. So what you see is a relationship where when you have high beach mass in a given fall, that following spring we see increased percentage of females in the population with cubs. So there's that really strong relationship between food abundance and masting cycles and bear reproductive rates. That's not a surprise. But what we also see is a strong relationship between mass production and the availability of mass on the landscape and complaints. So again, to reiterate the fact that in many ways, these annual complaints are really driven by natural food abundance. If it was up to bears, they'd prefer to feed on high quality natural foods in more remote areas. But that's not always the case. When Mother Nature doesn't provide those food resources, but we do in our backyards, bears know how to supplement. So this again is it's not 2020 data, but it doesn't matter what year you plug into this. The distribution of different components of this pie chart are always very similar. And it doesn't matter if it's a high complaint year or low complaint year, but the reality of it is when you look at the total number of bear-human conflicts that get documented in a given year, for the most part, you can usually attribute 70+% of them to three categories. First and foremost is typically garbage, and the fact that a lot of people don't properly secure garbage. Second one is that there's an increasing number of chickens on the landscape being raised in backyards that are not adequately protected from bears and other critters that will eat chicken. And thirdly, despite constant messaging, there's still a lot of bird feeders on the landscape throughout spring and summer that are attracting bears. And I keep talking about this human population. This, I can assure you that this data didn't incorporate the COVID pandemic. There was no way of knowing that. But even prior to that, New Hampshire was a destination area. A lot of people, in terms of New England states, New Hampshire's human population was growing at a more rapid rate than some of these other states, and that was predicted to continue. So we have more and more people moving into the state, and we're running out of room. People are building houses deeper into the woods, higher up on the ridges, and as a result, they're coming into closer contact with areas where bears live, and this interface between bears and humans is becoming closer. And a lot of people like to feed birds. The challenge is there's nothing in the woods, particularly during spring and summer months, that even comes close from a nutritional standpoint as black oil sunflower seed. It's very high protein and fat. It's high test for bears. So, if you give a bear the opportunity to choose between sunflower seeds or 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 a raspberry, which is high in sugar but low in fat, it's an easy choice for a bear. When these bears come out of hibernation in the springtime, they've lost, a considerable amount of their body weight due to the hibernating process. 25 to 50%, depending on the bear. Um, they spend the first half of summer trying to recover from the weight that was lost during the last denning period, and then they spend the latter half of the summer trying to bulk up for the next denning period. It helps you understand why food, particularly high quality food, is so important to these animals and why they will take the risks that they take in order to get this high quality food. That one doesn't need a lot of explanation. But we do bad things. We intentionally feed wildlife. That happens with bear, it happens with deer, it happens with a lot of species. In doing so, just instills this behavior in bears that, hey, if I panhandle in backyards, I I get food tossed to me. But there's also another type of feeding that's very widespread, and it's this kind of inadvertent feeding. This bird, for many, this is not as ridiculous as the previous slide where the guy was handing the bear the apple, but um, the outcome's the same. Whether this feed is being put out for bears or other wildlife, the fact that bears are taking advantage of it and getting rewarded by it is detrimental. Bears can cause property damage. A stinky garbage can on the other side of a garage door is not much of a barrier to a bear who has an exceptional ability to locate food with its sense of smell. And if we're talking about maintaining um, high tolerance of bears, this doesn't help in that regard. And for many, just the presence of a bear is a negative thing. A percentage of the calls we get each summer are really sightings, but in most situations, there are people who are concerned. They're concerned that this bear is here to do harm to their family, that this bear represents some kind of a danger. So those are some of the type of calls we deal with, and the type of people that need to be educated. Whenever you put bears in around human occupied areas, their survival rate declines. There's a lot of factors a lot of mortality factors that become present. Um, for example, increased motor vehicle strikes. And bears can get themselves in situations because of their feeding behaviors related to human-related foods. So we know that allowing bears access to human-related foods has some real impacts on the behaviors of bears and the ability to habituate bears to human-occupied areas. We know that, but are there other impacts? Well, we're starting to get each year. It's not uncommon now to get a handful of calls around the state or reports about these sows with large litter sizes. 4, and even one case a number of years ago, five cubs. So it's likely, or more than likely, that this constant access to high test human related foods is causing these bears to have higher reproductive rates. A lot of these females that have these big litters are very large themselves. The average female bear in New Hampshire weighs about 130 to 150 pounds, but we're seeing these sows that are 250 to 300 pounds, and they're big animals. They eat a lot of high calorie human related foods, and as a result, they're having larger litter sizes. And that's not the norm. The normal litter size for in New England, a female black bear in New England is 2 to 3 cubs every other year. So, we're having other impacts besides behavioral impacts on bears. So what are we doing about it? Well, we're very fortunate here in New Hampshire that we have a partnership with a federal agency, which is U.S. Department of Agriculture and their branch of Wildlife Services. So we've had this partnership with them since the mid 80s. And what this does is this allows us to pool both state and federal resources into this bear education conflict mitigation program. So as part of this program, we have multiple staff that are dedicated to responding to bear-human conflicts. We bring on specific bear technicians during the spring and summer months, and in the last 2 or 3 years, we've had upwards to 3 bear technicians that are full-time working on these type of conflicts, and they work in conjunction with the wildlife biologists and other folks. But the goals of the program are pretty straightforward. One is to educate the public about bears and try to increase public awareness of bears. Provide technical assistance, meet with people, provide site visits, and show people what they need to do in their own backyard in order to reduce conflicts. And this is often done by loaning equipment. So the education, most of you are probably familiar with some of our different educational materials that we use to, just to try to bring awareness to the presence of bears on the landscape, and try to make people that are either residents or visitors of New Hampshire better understand that, if you come to New Hampshire, you're in bear country. And if you're going to live or recreate in bear country, there are some things that you need to do in order to prevent conflict. And, this program really hinges on trying to make people more aware, more responsible, and ultimately more tolerant. Because remember, tolerance is what's going to limit New Hampshire's bear population. So some of the different types of technical assistance, a lot of it involves loaning equipment, showing people what works, what doesn't, with the ultimate hope that, if you invest some time with a person, show them the equipment that works, perhaps that they would be willing to, in the future, make the investment themselves. We want to help people resolve the immediate conflict that we're having with a bear, but we also want to teach them how to avoid conflicts moving forward. Some of the different, the most popular piece of equipment that we're loaning is fencing for sure. But there are other items. At times we use pyrotechnics for hazing bears or scaring bears out of yards. This one's very popular, the motion activated alarms called the critter getters. Air horns, very useful. There are times when we utilize people with trained bear dogs to run and scare bears out of areas, try to just aversively condition bears. And we have some garbage cans, both some being commercially made bear-proof cans and others being kind of retrofitted bear-resistant cans, and I'll talk about some of this. So this is an example of some of the equipment that we're loaning to folks. But when people have a bear in their yard, this is often the phone call. Come get your bear. Come get your bear out of my yard, or I'm gonna shoot it. That's people know how to push buttons. They know how to try to force a manager's hand. And admittedly, 10, 20 years ago, we were moving. I don't know if we were ever moving a lot of bears in New Hampshire, but we were moving more bears than we are now. And we all know the story of mink. And if anything, it's a reminder of why translocation of bears as a result of bear-human conflicts really is not the department's desired response. Bears have home ranges. They have strong fidelity to these home ranges, and bears want to be in their home range. Whether it's politically driven or whatever the factor is, you're not going to change that. So moving bears around the landscape really is not a viable way to try to get ahead of these conflicts. And of course, if you don't know the story of Mink, she ultimately reoccupied her historic range in the town of Hanover in Lebanon, despite being moved to the more northern part of the state. What we'd rather do is we'd rather teach people how to coexist with these animals. We'd rather teach people, encourage people to be willing to make investments into long-lasting solutions. Let's resolve the current conflict, but more importantly, let's put you in a situation where you're not going to have the same conflict again in the future. So that's really where the program is putting its effort. Dumpsters are a problem. It's not a surprise that they make up the largest part of that pie chart I showed you. There's a lot of plastic top dumpsters around the state that simply are not a proper barrier to a bear. Not trying to call out any particular company, but it's a growing issue. And the reality of it is these garbage companies, they would prefer not to provide metal tops because doing so is an added step when emptying the can. It usually involves having to get off and unlock a dumpster before it gets emptied. So, it's unfortunately it's not as simple as calling up your dumpster company and requesting a metal top. A lot of people do that, and it's great, but a lot of these companies, somewhat hesitant to provide these metal tops. So we're in a situation where we know what the problem is, but there's really no great solution to the problem because we can't all get on the same page. There are some solutions. There are some commercially made bear-proof containers. The downside is these things are fairly expensive, and not everybody can afford them. Not everybody is willing to spend $250 to $450 on a commercially made bear-proof can. Some people just don't have those means. And there's a human component. You can put the best equipment in place, but you're still relying on people, taking a minute to do the right thing. And that's not always easy. And the plywood with rusty nails is never a good solution. I get highly frustrated when I see that. And we really need to move away from that way of thinking, because not only is it inhumane, it's completely ineffective. So recognizing that a lot of these bear cans are very, very expensive, we do promote what we consider a more bear resistant container, and these are something that folks can do. If they buy one of the more sturdier plastic containers from like a Home Depot or Lowe's, those type of stores, you can buy these hasps and retrofit the can yourself. Again, I don't know that we can call these completely bear proof, but certainly certainly will keep some bears out, and we've had some luck with that. Some people are also good about building their own types of cans that can be bear proof or bear resistant. And there are some commercially made cans that have screw tops that are a lot more difficult to use, but as a result, the price is a lot lower. So there are some other options out there. And when it comes to controlling bears, you really got to beat their sense of smell. It's how these animals find the majority of their food. They have think back to that garage door that was ripped apart. Had that person taken some precautions in order to try to control the odor of the garbage, that bear wouldn't have known that garbage is in there. So it's really about, not letting the animal find the attractant. So when it comes to, garbage, some examples are bag your garbage in a plastic bag and then also put it into an airtight plastic container. That can really help wall off that odor. Also, you can use ammonia as a good cover scent, to mask the odor associated with garbage. And also, if a bear does get access to the can, and flips the lid off and gets a face full of ammonia, that can be a strong deterrent. So, just taking some extra steps to try to think about ways to um, beat the nose of a bear so that they don't become attracted to your yard or places where you're storing your garbage. But it's really ultimately about, if it's a food resource that can be removed or better secured, that's the answer. When it comes to bird feeders, putting them out during the day, taking them in at night, it's not going to work. The bear's going to start coming in the day. So it's really about, if the attractant can be removed, think about how important it is to have that food attractant out there. Is feeding birds during the summer important enough to put bears at detriment? So it's about making those decisions. And ultimately, and it doesn't matter if it's a dumpster or if you're camping or if it's storing your garbage in the shed, it's about securing that attractant and denying a bear's access. Once a bear is not getting food rewarded, they give up. They're not going to spend a lot of time trying to get food at locations where they're not successfully getting rewarded. So it's about eliminating the rewards so that these animals don't keep becoming conditioned. Electric fence, I can't say enough good things about it. It's one of the most popular tools that we loan. We're loaning it primarily to show people how to protect backyard poultry operations and beehives and some of those type of factors. But, it even can be used beyond that. I've seen people put electric fence around dumpsters. We put electric fence around sheds where people are storing garbage, where the bear has discovered the garbage. So a lot of different applications. These fences come in a lot of different types, and some are very easy and quick to set up. Some are more involved, depends on whether or not you're looking for a temporary fence or a more secure long-term fence. There's really a lot of options out there. And, if done right, they're aesthetically pleasing. It's a very nice chicken coop, and the fence isn't detracting from that. Bears on electricity. It doesn't take a bear many times to have experience or a negative experience with a fence where they give up. So, usually on the first night or two when a fence is put out, any bear that was in the area that was being attracted to whatever resources behind the fence, they usually quickly get familiar with the fence, and that's really all it usually takes. Very effective at protecting bees. And we've even had some opportunities to introduce these into the school systems. A few years ago, the White Mountain Regional High School in Whitefield was getting into beekeeping. So they called looking for advice. So we set up a day where we used the students and put up an electric fence around their hives. And so what you've done is you've taught that younger generation that raising bees in New Hampshire is very easy and possible. It just requires one extra step, and that's making the investment and taking the time to invest in the equipment to protect your resource. These are some examples of the different types of equipment we're using. These are different chargers ranging from solar to plug-in to battery power. So lots of options. These options can usually be retrofitted to cover any fencing need. And ultimately, the price is not talking lots and lots of money, particularly if you look at this as a long-term investment. The fences we're using, we've been deploying the same fence for 10 plus years. So this stuff does have a long life to it, particularly if it's taken care of. So you're not talking big money, and in the grand scheme of things, it's in my mind, it's a small price to pay in order to avoid conflicts with wildlife and to protect your resource. There are some things you can do electric fencing to make it more effective. We recommend that you bait the fence using, it's just a technique to draw a bear's attention to the fence and make good contact with the fence. We use things such as a piece of tin foil with some peanut butter or jelly smeared on it. The idea is to lure that bear in, um, and have it get a good wet mouth on that and get zapped. And what that really does is that increases the learning curve associated with what these fences mean to bears. Fences are also only as good as their maintenance. Having a fence means maintaining that fence, doing vegetation control around the fence. When I get calls from folks that have had bears get through fence, usually the first thing I do is show up my handy dandy fence tester, and typically it's pretty easy to understand why that fence failed. In most situations, it's because the fence lost its charge. Either it got shorted out because of tall vegetation, or the batteries in the charger died. Something happened so that fence wasn't working properly. We have done some things here in New Hampshire, both in the department level as well as some of the towns have really taken some initiative on their own to come up with some different ways to deal with some of these food attractants and control the amount of bear-human conflicts in a given area. We did pass a rule back in 2006, I think it was, so quite a number of years ago, making it illegal to feed bears, and that's whether it's intentional feeding or unintentional feeding. So now we do have the ability to use this rule in order to get some of this feeding curtailed, and that's been very successful. I would say since 2006, we probably shut down, realistically, probably around 80 feed sites around the state over time. And those might range from a person feeding a single bear to the worst one that I ever dealt with was a place that was feeding over 30 bears. So, feeding's a thing. People like to feed wildlife, and bears are pretty easy to start attracting with feed. But these town ordinances, and we've worked with some different towns and gotten these ordinances put in place. Those can be very effective when properly used and properly enforced. So there are 5 towns in New Hampshire right now that have a feeding ordinance in place. These ordinances, by feeding ordinance, most of these ordinances specify how garbage and other types of attractants are stored. Of these 5 towns, the only 2 towns that are really enforcing the ordinance at the minute is Lincoln and Littleton, but they're working very well there. And, this is what complaints in the town of Lincoln look like before and after the institution of an ordinance back in 2003. So, it's pretty clear cut. If you come out with increased regulations to mandate how common bear attractants are stored and managed, you can successfully reduce bear-human conflicts. So it's being a town ordinance. It requires a vote within the town, and it also requires that the typically it's the police department have a willingness to enforce these ordinances. So I encourage any town to consider these. They can be very useful. Backyard chickens are a big issue, and if you recall back to the pie chart, it made up a significant part of the annual issues related to bears and chickens. And when most people are setting up their coops, they're generally thinking, how do I, they view the fencing as simply a means to keep the chickens contained, and they're not really thinking about how to keep the bear out. And we're dealing with an increasing number of bear chicken issues. A lot of these coops simply are not any kind of a barrier to a bear, and in many situations, bears are paying the price. This is documented, not just documented number of conflicts each year related to bears and chicken issues. You can see, that these numbers are pretty high in some years. I think there's a lot more people raising chickens in their backyard, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but there also needs to be the understanding that these animals are a prey species for a lot of species. So if you're going to be unwilling to accept some loss to wildlife, then you need to be thinking about creating a protective barrier. But unfortunately, a lot of people are killing bears as a result of conflicts with chickens, and we'd really like to get away from that and show people a different approach, such as electric fencing. And in some summers, the killing of these particularly female bears around chicken coops can be a major cause of cub orphaning. In some years, we might end up with 20, 30 cubs over the course of a summer, all the result of sows getting killed at chicken coops. So, it is a problem. I threw this in because it's a good contrast to the chicken issue. You're kind of dealing with a similar thing. You're dealing with a specific resource that bears are highly attracted to that can be protected with fencing. But you kind of see, if you look at the magnitude of the scale of this graphic, of the number of complaints a year due to bees, it's considerably lower than that due to chickens. And that's because beekeepers have gone through the growing pains of trying to raise bees on a landscape that has bears. Chicken folks are in the middle of it now. Beekeepers have been there, done that. So most of our beekeepers are very educated. Most beekeepers have electric fencing. And as a result, the number of annual complaints related to bears in beehives is considerably lower than it is with bears in chicken coops. So we need to continue educating our chicken owners and get them to this level. So I do want to talk about cub rehabilitation a little bit. It's it's something that we do in New Hampshire. We bring orphan bear cubs to the Kill and Bear Center in Lyme, New Hampshire. I think it's a real valuable asset that we have here in the state, and also we're able to offer this opportunity in both Vermont, Massachusetts. The Kill and Bear Center also takes cubs from those locations, and there's mixed feelings on cub rehabilitation. When I first started, I didn't really have a opinion on it, but I can tell you, after doing it for 20 plus years, I think it's a good thing. But with that said, and Ben and Deb and Phoebe Kill and myself would all say the same thing. We'd be most pleased if no bears were going to the facility each year. We'd rather female bears raise their young. But the reality of it is people do care about bears, and the reason for bringing orphan cubs to a facility like this and intervening so that you can get these bears back on the landscape. There's a lot of reasons for doing it, but it is not for population reasons. We don't need these bears in order to maintain our current population numbers. However, there is a level of animal welfare that comes into play. The public expectation is that we help these cubs when we can, and our approach is, if there's a bear that we can intervene over the short term and get that bear back on its feet to ultimately make it a bear that can be released and be successful back in the wild, we are doing that. And collectively with the center, we have probably rehabbed and released pushing 300 bears in over 20 years. So we've done a lot of it. We've put radio collars on these bears. We've done research on these bears, and to date, our findings really are that these bears can be reintroduced back into the wild as very functioning wild black bears. So people, as I said, one of the other advantages of doing this is I think it helps. If people have good opinions of bears and if people care about bears, I think it's important as a management agency to nurture and expand on that, because ultimately, if people care more about a critter, they're going to be more willing to change their own human behavior in order to accommodate that critter. So I think it's just a good way to promote the value of bears in our lives and on our landscapes. But it's a lot of work. And the Killam family has really dedicated their lives to helping bears like this and getting these bears back on the landscape. So, and ultimately, how long an individual bear stays at the facility really depends on when they come in. If they come in a real young age, no bear is there more than, say, a year. Some bears only have to be there a matter of weeks or a month or two, but the typical time of release is late spring, early summer. And we go down to the facility, we capture bears, and then we distribute them to different release sites throughout kind of the central and the northern part of the state. So like I said, in the last 20 plus years, we've released upwards to 300 of these in different parts of the state with success. I just want to finish with some what I consider key messages to living with black bears. And they include the fact that New Hampshire's bear population is closely monitored and highly regulated. Managing bear-human conflicts is more about manipulating human behavior than bear behavior. We're not going to change bear behavior. Bears are hardwired to find high-quality food. They're willing to take risks to find high-quality food, and they can easily be habituated to areas where they're consistently successful. So you're not going to change that. The answer is changing people and people's values and people's actions. Bear conflicts are a community issue. It's important to work together. People don't need to fear bears, but they should respect bears. Bears are part of our landscape. Let's coexist. An increased human responsibility, a proactive attitude, and an increased tolerance are the most effective tools in the toolbox. And I will end with a picture of a large, beautiful black bear in the spring woods of the White Mountains, and open up to any questions that folks might have.
All right, Andy, thank you so much for that. I have a handful of questions that have come in through the chat that I'm gonna start with. Folks are welcome to continue to add their questions to there, or to hold off and ask them afterwards. A few questions, well, as you can imagine, many of the questions have to do with those bear-human interactions. Earlier in the presentation, there was the video footage where you showed the bear, the ability of a bear to enter through an open window. Is that, I guess there's a question as to how dexterous, bears are, and if they can open windows, and, does that mean that, we shouldn't be those, homes that don't have air conditioning, that, windows on the first floor of a house shouldn't be left open?
Okay, so in the total number of bear issues in a given summer, the amount of bears that actually enter homes is pretty low. It's not the norm for most bears. It really takes a bear to become pretty conditioned and habituated to that lifestyle to where it gets to the point where it starts entering homes and searching for food. They are very dexterous. Bears are getting better at opening up car doors. We're hearing more and more of that each year. So they can work levers and figure things out to some degree. Generally with a closed window, less so with that, unless there's an ability for the bear to get good purchase and kind of tear on it. This bear never did that. This bear was, if it couldn't get in easily, it didn't try. To get to the question about, I don't think people need to live in fear that if they leave their window open that they're going to end up with a bear in their house. If you're seeing a bear periodically around your yard, if you accidentally left your garbage can out and it caused a bear to come into your yard, maybe for the next few nights, maybe think about only leaving your windows in open on the lower level while you're home and maybe not when you're gone. But I don't believe that people need to go to that extreme where they never open their windows in the summer and are constantly worried about a bear entering home, because the likelihood of it happening is extremely low.
Okay. Another question here is, a number of your graphs, I think 2012 stood out as, there seemed to be lots of complaints, lots of bear-human conflicts. Was it just one factor going on there, or were there, numerous issues happening in 2012?
Yeah, so in any given year, a big factor into the annual number of complaints, a big factor is food abundance. And on most years, there's usually some species that are producing some kind of mass to provide some food for bears. In 2012, because of a severe drought, there really was nothing to eat for bears and other critters. There was no berry crops in the summer. There was no fruit crops in the fall. There were no hard mass in the fall. So as a result, there really was nothing for animals to eat because of the extreme dry conditions. So that's why we saw that extreme spike. Well, I don't have data for last year yet. Last year was a high complaint year too, for some similar reasons. A lot of our summer berry crops suffered. But come fall, we had some hard mass. So point being is, those real extreme years like you saw in 2012, those only happened, thankfully, about 1 in 10 years. It's all factors really have to come into play to end up with a situation where there's absolutely nothing for a bear to eat. And we don't do that very often. In most years, there's some food resources out there that are providing a buffer to bears.
Okay. So we have, so another question coming in. I know that you mentioned, with the trash cans and, really trying to, to mask smells, or, have smells that are not attracted to bears. An individual who mentioned having an issue with bears digging in their yard and said that they used white vinegar. If you're noticing natural activity in your yard that you want to deter, that might not be tied to trash or poultry or bees, but maybe it's apple trees or or digging for grubs. Are there natural deterrents? I've also heard the use of like cayenne pepper on apple trees. So I don't know if there are any natural deterrents that you recommend.
So the only product that seems to have some advantage from deterring a bear olfactory is ammonia. If people are having some luck with cayenne pepper or white vinegar, great, and that's interesting. But I haven't heard that those have been hugely successful in the past. So ammonia is a good one to use, but probably even better than that is one of those motion activated alarms that I talked about. Those work good on fruit trees. If it's a bear digging for grubs over, the problem with those alarms is it's hard to cover a large area with those. Those are very more point specific. If a bear's digging for grubs, one answer may be to try to treat the grubs. Treat them like you would a vole, and try to treat the grubs and remove that. So I guess in short, I think electric fencing would be a little overkill for a situation like that, but maybe one of those alarms and maybe some ammonia would be adequate.
Okay. a couple questions just about New Hampshire's bear population in general. There was one question regarding the range, what the sort of natural range of an adult bear is.
Yeah. So in New Hampshire, the average home range of a adult female bear is around 6 to 8 square miles. A male is going to be 25 to 50 or even more. But most of that male's home range is coming as a result of the breeding season. That male's traveling a lot of area looking for receptive females. So that's the primary reason why a male's is so much larger. With that said, I will say that in some of these situations where we have bears move into communities where they're living off human-related foods, some of those animals, their home range can shrink down to less than 1 square mile. So it kind of varies, but as far as on average, a typical average New Hampshire female, it's 6 to 8 square miles, and a male is going to be 25 to 50 or more.
Okay, and you mentioned that that the New Hampshire bear population is heavily monitored and regulated. And my understanding is the New Hampshire bear population is about 48 to 5,000.
Yeah, so right now, at its height 3 or 4 years ago, the population was up around 6,000. Right now, we estimate the population down around 5,500. When and if we meet the objectives of the current big game management plan, if we meet all regional objectives, then our population will be at 4,800.
Okay, well, that was my
Yes.
question is in terms of what is, given all of the parameters, what is the ideal, population? So that's in that 48 to 5,000.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Which really equals out to about half a bear per square mile. And if you look at bear densities across their range, that's a very acceptable bear density. I can't think of many places that are much lower than that. Most places have, half to 1 bear per square mile. So we're certainly would be at the low side of that.
Mm-hmm. And we, certainly, and we might have folks watching from outside of the Mount Washington Valley. I think we're pretty familiar with our bear population. Does the southern part of the state and some of the more populated, centers, are they also experiencing these human bear conflicts at the rates that we are in the whites?
So, it's yes and no. The White Mountains still is kind of the leader as far as bear human conflicts. And I think the reason is because at times the White Mountains has some of the highest human population during specific time of the year, like summer. So we really see the highest concentrations of conflicts in areas where they have the highest concentration of people, which is no surprise. So the lakes regions up to the whites tends to be the area with the highest number of bear human conflicts. Down in some of those southern towns, particularly down in the southwest part of New Hampshire, overall their bear complaints are lower. But because they're less experienced with bears, I think a single bear in a community can really generate a lot of publicity. So I think people are well versed at, or less used to dealing with bears down there. So therefore a bear sighting that might be more common in the whites becomes a large issue down there. Mm-hmm. Although the overall number of interactions is lower.
Gotcha. Thinking of the White Mountains, there were 2 different questions that came in about, sort of recreating in the White Mountains. And so one was what the recommended etiquette, it would be if you are out hiking or in the backcountry and encounter a bear. And then the other being whether it's it's recommended to carry bear spray.
So the first one, so we really recommend, if possible, to use bear canisters, or, and I'm talking backcountry camping here, or to use campsites that have bear boxes, those type of things. Bear hangs tend to be a little less effective simply because we don't have the forest canopy. We don't have a lot of great bear hang trees in the white. So preference would be to use bear canisters and bear boxes, although obviously a bear hang would be the next best. Not sure if the question was asking specifically about if you encounter a bear, but the advice there would be, if you encounter a bear, it's really about try not to make it a startling situation for you or the bear. You know, if you see a bear from a distance and it's doing its thing and not really noticing you, if it's feeding along, I would just stand quietly and let it continue to do its thing and get out of view and then continue on. If it's a situation where the bear doesn't know you're there, or if the bear sees you and you see it and it's some distance away, I would make some moderate noise, just to let the bear know you're there to avoid a startling situation. Hey bear, I'm here. That's adequate. Don't need to make a lot of noise. Don't need to escalate a situation. Just, make some modest noise, talk to the bear calmly. And what you're really doing is you're letting the bear know that I'm here. I'm not a threat to you. And generally what's going to happen is the bear is going to scoot on its way, and that's it. If you find yourself in a situation where you come in close quarters with a bear, the recommendation is to continue talking to the bear calmly. Hey bear, maintain eye contact and back away from the bear. The one thing that it can happen on the whites occasionally is you can run into these bears that are they're basically begging, and they will follow and just be persistent. We dealt with one last summer, but it had been going on for a couple of years up on the Kinsman Range. I've dealt with about 2 or 3 of these over the 20 years. So again, it's not super common, but the challenge with them is they're approaching. So our advice is to distance yourself from them, which you can do. The problem is some of them will just continue to follow you because they're waiting for you to toss them some food. And obviously tossing them food is not recommended because it's just continuing to encourage that bear's behavior. But if the bear just won't leave you alone and you need to get away from it and it's sticking right with you, I guess the most important thing for people is to get that distance. So if it means doing that in order to put some space between you and it, I would say do it, but be sure to report that. A bear like that really just needs to be told, needs to be harassed and pushed away. And you can do that by getting more aggressive with it. But we tend not to recommend to people to do that because we don't want to put people in an uncomfortable situation. But if I was to encounter a bear like that on the trail that just was being persistent and following, I would even consider throwing rocks and sticks at it. I would probably try to make it a little more uncomfortable of a situation for it rather than the more passive situation. Bear spray is, if you carry it, you'll probably never use it. But if you carry it, if it makes you feel better, I would say carry it. Just be conscious of shooting that stuff off in windy conditions and those type of things, because in some situations you can end up getting more of it than the bear is. But if having a canister on it makes you feel more empowered and comfortable, I think it's a good thing. And obviously if you get face to face with a bear like that panhandling bear that's following you, that would be a good situation to give him a blast and try to tell him no, his behavior is unwanted. So
a few more quick questions. One, there was, and a question about notification systems for bears in the area. My assumption is most of these are done at the community level, if done at all. I know, in Jackson, like there was an email that went out, to everyone on the community email list that went out last week saying bears are in the area, make sure your bird feeders are down.
Yeah, so there's I think those announcements are good when they talk about, being cognizant of attractants. When the message is about, bears are out, bears are active, you know, get your bird feeders down for the summer. I think those are good. I don't always love the ones that are more kind of fear driven, like alert, bear in the area, be careful, because I don't think they're necessary. And I think if you
Mhm.
keep putting that message out, I think it becomes white noise. And I don't think it's so messaging and community hotlines and those type of things that relate to addressing food attractants are good. As far as warning about human safety, I think it would have to be a real serious situation before I think that would be of great value. Don't know if that answered the question or not, but
Yeah, no, that is good. And speaking of, bird feeders, because I know that many of us take down our black oil sunflower feeders, but maybe we switch them out in a few months or weeks and put up hummingbird feeders. What is Fish and Game's thought on hummingbird feeders?
so for me, I don't see hummingbird feeders being a huge issue. I have them at my house. They are not the draw that those seed feeders are. If there's a bear that's used to coming into yards and looking for dangling objects to investigate it, it might investigate the hummingbird feeder, but it's not getting enough out of there to make it become a significant attractant. So I would say, yeah, continue feeding your hummingbirds, and it's a good surrogate to putting out seed feeders.
Mhm. Okay, wonderful. And one last question for you, Andy, and I appreciate your, tackling all of this as our, we're really gonna put you through the paces. But in your, in your career working with, in all of these situations, is there a particular bear or particular situation that that stands out in your mind or that you would like to share?
Well, so there's been 2 or 3 bears over time that have been, their fate is not pretty. They're bears that we ultimately had to capture and destroy because of their behavior, but they've been really difficult to catch, and because they're crafty and good at their game. And I always have the utmost respect for those animals. Without getting into too many specifics, but I can remember a particular bear down in Sugar Hill one year that mastered getting into vehicles, and he was able to open doors, some pretty sophisticated doors. So on any given morning, you would drive through Sugar Hill at dark 30 in the morning, and you would find these vehicles with all the doors open and lights on because that bear hit it. On one night when we were trying to catch it, that bear actually got into my vehicle while I was waiting for him. So we ended up catching the bear, and I wish we hadn't. But that bear was, just the ability of some of these bears and their wit and their level of intelligence and their resourcefulness really makes me respect some of these critters. And it's too bad that they can be so persistent at times, because it puts us in situations where we're forced to take action. So I don't know if I could think of others. They don't all end on that note, but yeah, just neat animals to work with. And yeah.
All right, well, Andy, thank you so much for your time for this presentation. We are recording. So, so if anyone missed part of it, wants to go back, we should have it up by tomorrow or Saturday on our YouTube channel. But thank you all so much for joining us. And everyone, please stay safe and stay warm and dry tomorrow.
Thank you, everyone.